Hey there, my name is Aman, and I'm on the product team at Arise. Today we're going to be covering how to capture sessions and use sessions to debug your LLM Chatbot application. So sessions are a convenient way for you to group traces from your application. For instance, back and forths you might be having, a user might be having with your application in the first place. So let's take a look at an example here. So for instance, we might have a user coming to our platform. Let's say this is like a trip planning agent or chatbot saying, can you help me find a hotel in San Francisco? To which your AI agent might respond with, sure, when will you be in San Francisco? And sort of so on and so forth, the conversation back and forth might continue. We might want to group these messages through a concept called a session so that we can actually debug exactly what might be going on with our application down the line. This is super straightforward from a data model perspective. So what you can think of as a group of traces, you can actually attach what's called a session ID to these groups of traces. And the user ID in this case might be something like Andrew. You can also attach that to your traces. So why might you want to do this? Well, it's really helpful to understand where exactly a conversation breaks or goes off the rails. You might want to be able to find groups of traces where your application isn't performing well, and even perform LLM-assisted evaluations or other evaluations on the session or user level that you might want to use to debug your application further. Let's learn how to instrument sessions. So for that, I'll hop over to our docs. So looking a little bit further here, you can actually see that instrumenting the session ID when you're actually instrumenting your traces is simply you can simply pass an attribute here, and we've kind of created this convenience function for you called with using attributes, where you can pass your session ID or a user ID or session and user ID, and you basically want to instantiate this right before you're making the call to your LLM. Let's take a look with Llama Index, for instance. If I'm using the chat engine from Llama Index, I can actually wrap the response to the chat engine that I'm making with using attributes and pass in those session ID and user ID. And I have full control over this logic in my application. So I could pass a text string, or I could pass a random UUID as well. Alternatively, you can also wrap your calls inside functions and use them as decorators. So you can actually pass this this decorator with using attributes and then whatever that session ID might be, and then define your function underneath that's actually making the call to the language model. Awesome. Now let's figure out how to actually do this in real time. So taking a look at this notebook, we're actually going to instrument sessions in real time. So Arise can act as an OTel collector. So simply all you have to do is, you can use this convenience function we developed, this package called, from Arise OTel, import the necessary sort of dependencies here. And here you can actually just set up your space key, API key, which you can find in the platform here, and pass in whatever you want to name your model ID. Underneath the hood, what's happening is you're actually able to set and configure however you'd like. So you can actually pass in, different endpoints if you're hosting Arise, or if you're using a different span exporter or processor or tracer provider as well. And that's fully configurable underneath the hood. So I've gone ahead and run some of this notebook already, and I've actually gone in and passed in an OpenAI key. And what we're going to do is actually run a small subset of queries here by passing in that session ID and user ID I was talking about earlier. So I can actually go in and wrap my query, and underneath my query, I've got this using attributes method, where I can then make a call to my Llama Index query engine. So this is sort of think like a RAG on my chatbot, on my docs use case, where I can actually ask a series of questions, and then my application is going to do some lookup and give some responses based on my documents to the questions that the user might be asking. And those are going to be attached to this session ID and a user ID as variables here. Let's name it session ID tutorial. And pass these in using the class that we talked about earlier with using attributes. And so we're going to run a small subset of queries here, and these are actually going to be sent to the Arise platform. So we're actually running these in Llama Index, generating responses. We can go ahead and do that again over here just for completeness. So we're going to actually run a second session, session ID 2, and attach that to the traces as well. Okay, awesome. Now that we've sent in our data, let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like in the platform. So I'm actually going to this tutorial sessions model that I sent in earlier. And taking a look here, it looks like I've got some traces sent in. I got my latency, and then I do have the questions that I earlier showed from the notebook. Can I send truth labels to arise separately? Yes, you can send truth labels to arise separately. And then I do have those session IDs that we saw earlier, session ID tutorial that we kind of created in real time. Let's take a look at where this takes us. So from here, I can actually see the entire group of traces that we generated earlier using the notebook. And you can see that there's multiple traces, total traces equals 5 in this session ID that I defined earlier. I even have the user ID here. So the user ID was John Smith, and then I can see the latency. And so each of these is really traces back and forth. From here, I can go back to the trace view, and this will actually show all of the calls that are being made underneath the hood from that simple, Llama index query engine call that we made. So, and all of these are basically attached to that session ID, underneath the hood with our context manager. What's beneficial about this is that, I can actually go back and forth between my session and between my user ID to go in and debug, why did this call take a little bit longer? I might want to go in and check the timing for the span that took the longest amount of time. Or maybe, maybe the user asks a question I want to understand a little bit deeper. What are the retrieved documents in that case? Well, I can do that really simply from the session ID directly. So really convenient way for you to hop between sessions and between spans and traces that we've instrumented from our application. So let's take a look at another really powerful flow here, which is using evals to debug my sessions. So here I have another model with really similar data. It's questions that a user is asking about the Arise platform. And I can actually go into an individual session here and take a look at the evals that I've generated. So I've basically used evals from the Arise Phoenix package and generated those evals on my tracing data and sent those back in here. And those will also be joined back with the traces that you see in the platform and show up on the sessions page. So let's take a look at this particular interaction. I can actually see this question this user is asking, what counts against my plan usage? And then the LLM gives a response. The plan usage is likely related to the computational resources or actions when setting up and running the monitor settings. Well, if I actually take a look at the evaluations here, you can see that I used LLM as a judge to evaluate the response that this chatbot gave. And actually the label back is that this response is hallucinated and that it is actually incorrect. I can take a further look here and actually go in and take a look at my LLM spans, try to understand what exactly is the retrieved context and why are my evals showing up. You can see my explanations are showing up here as well to help me debug my session, in particular where my session broke using traces. Okay, awesome. So sessions and users are just one of many types of attributes or metadata that might be really helpful when you're actually debugging your application. So feel free to also send in other types of what we call context attributes. So for instance, that could be prompt template, metadata, or other attributes that might be important. And you'll of course see those sessions and users showing up on the sessions page, and the metadata also showing up in the attributes block of the traces. So this is actually using our context manager to add this metadata from a span to other spans within the same trace. Great, so that's a little bit on how to apply sessions and users to your chatbot. Feel free to give it a shot and give us feedback as you try it out. Thanks.